Ouais.
You are taking over here, right? I will.
I will sit next to you.
Great.
With thousands of your fans and
All right.
hang out on there to record if you don't mind.
I like that, please. Let's get here.
Can you grab beers in the fridge before you sit down in the morning? I'll share. Okay, thanks.
It's my personal stash.
Appreciate it.
I want my personal stash.
You want your personal stash as well?
Yes. Those guacamole chips, huh?
Yeah, those are good.
They were like a real winner. It's like you don't have to do any work.
Yeah, it's just all, yeah.
It's all together. Yeah.
This one's steak?
Exactly.
No problem.
We're rolling big screen this time.
I know.
That's right. Sorry.
Okay, should we get started? So, welcome to our second Xoogler event around growth hacking. So, we're very fortunate to have John who graciously decided to come. So, John used to be at Google, right? And then you started your own.
Did, yeah,
company.
just over 3 years ago.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your background and your company?
Yeah, so hi everyone, John. I'm one of the co-founders, CEO of a company called URX. So we are a mobile distribution platform that helps publishers distribute and monetize their content on mobile. Before URX, I was on the Google Analytics team, kind of doing developer relations and helping build out the developer platform that now 2-3 million developers use to either implement tracking onto their websites or to use data that's collected by Google Analytics to build other cool things on top of it. And one of the kind of problems that I kind of noticed or we saw on the GA team was, this was back in 2012, 2013, or early 13, when, Google Analytics had to be completely rebuilt from scratch in order to work for apps, right? Just the entire tracking model, attribution model, like no cookie space, that whole, basically everything about how Google Analytics worked had to be rebuilt in order to work for apps. It's kind of this whole idea of changing the engine when the plane is mid-flight kind of made me really start to think and realize if something as ubiquitous as Google Analytics has to be rebuilt for mobile, what other things are also going to have to be rebuilt for kind of this like new app-first mobile world, right? And kind of looking at and understanding how that ecosystem was developing. One of the most like obvious and clear things was that if links are the backbone of how the web-based world works, there are no links for apps, right? There were this thing called deep linking, which is now kind of more popular. It was something that no one was even really talking about at the time. It was part of Android from the first version. It's something called Android Intense, but the idea hadn't really propagated across iOS at the time. So a lot of what we kind of realized is if you could actually help developers set deep linking up in their app, and you could actually then be a company that understood all of the content that existed in all of that, every app, you can actually build a different discovery paradigm for how users actually found things that existed inside apps. Again, this whole idea that you don't have to install websites, but you have to install now the 35 to 45 apps that the user has on their phone. And the fact that the browser is now only one of those apps as opposed to the only app that you use, and it made you realize there's this highly fragmented world. And as we kind of dove into that and understood that in a little more detail, the big kind of problem that we realized was that if you're a content creator, so someone like a Condé Nast, a Time, an AOL, a Hearst, a Gannett, who are all some of our customers today, you are now whether you like it or not, a mobile first company, right? Like your content is now, you have 2/3 of your people or of your views are on mobile, and of that, over 80% of it comes from actually the mobile web, as opposed to from your own native app. So if you think about the reason for this is because, the way that I find content and engage with content today, one of my friends shares a link on Facebook or Twitter or somewhere else. I click on that link, I access it inside a web view, and then I click an X when I'm done, and I go back to what I was doing. Right? So you have all this content being accessed on mobile. You have all this content being accessed in places where you actually don't have cookies or you don't have user identifiers, because guess what? is no third-party cookie tracking inside a web view. How the heck are you supposed to make that whole thing work? So we kind of really saw that line of thought of all of this huge problem that was developing for all of these content creators. And on the other side, you realize how fragmented and how different kind of the mobile world was compared to the desktop world. That's where we kind of realized this idea of building a discovery and distribution layer was really something that someone was going to have the chance to do in kind of this new mobile world. So it was kind of the unabridged version, we'll say.
So you're squarely at the point of promotional content and the user context and really driving conversion.
Yeah.
What are some of the use cases that you've seen recently around mobile?
Yeah. So maybe just to kind of like so at the way that what we do works today, just kind of to ground that. So we'll work with advertisers and publishers as a traditional ads model would work. So we work with companies like Apple, so like promoting the content inside Apple Music, or Google Play, promoting the things inside the Play Store, Amazon, eBay, etc. So what we'll do is we'll then go and actually ingest or crawl all of their product catalogs. So kind of everything that they have and all of the metadata about all of those things. And then similar to kind of how AdSense works, we'll then actually have a deployable JavaScript or native SDK that a publisher kind of embeds into their content. And then whenever that content loads, we figure out what it's about and then figure out what the right piece of content from inside another app is, and then display that inside the host app. So as an example, you're on Entertainment Weekly reading about Justin Bieber, and you'll actually see a carousel of stuff about Justin Bieber across multiple apps that you might have on your phone. When you click, it'll then deep link you into the app you have installed, or take you to the mobile web if you don't. That's actually one of the big things that has come up recently as kind of a best practice in kind of mobile distribution, and kind of is that content is content. It doesn't matter whether it's in an app or on the web. So really, as a creator, your best opportunity is to just get users in front of that content and kind of like let the operating system figure out app, not app, kind of what have you. With that, part of what's happened is that people's mobile websites are actually now becoming the #1 way they're promoting their apps, as opposed to sending people directly to the app store. So that's a big change that's happened really in the last, call it 6 to 9 months.
So what do you think about the user experience, right? It's not kind of disruptive because you're doing A and then all of a sudden you're going into B.
Yeah, so I think really it's just the way that again, I always like to try to think about things in terms of kind of the web precedent for things, right? So people are very used to being in a piece of content, seeing a link, clicking on a link, and taking you elsewhere to another piece of content. I think really now the reason that it's got so confused in the mobile world is that, again, that content can live in many different places, right? So there's a notion of like service discovery. We have to even understand where the best host environment is to access that content before you can do it. Right? And that's like some of the core mechanics of how deep linking and routing users works. But really, it's as a user, if I think the most disruptive thing is to click on a piece of content that I want to access and then be taken to the app store, as opposed to just the damn content. Right? I think that's the reason that we've seen this best practice emerge around taking users to the content independent of whether it's in an app on the mobile web. It's because of the fact that it is highly disruptive to click on a piece of content, go to the app store and be like, what the heck, I just wanted to check out this one song by this one artist. I don't really want to go install this whole freaking app. Right?
So don't push people to the app store,
yeah,
as
exactly.
opposed to what Facebook ads are doing.
I think it's actually Facebook ads are driving app installs. So there's a very nuanced but important difference in promoting an app for the app itself. So this is Game of War. Hey, come play Game of War now, versus saying, hey, come install Amazon because we have this one vacuum cleaner you really want to buy, right? So I think compare the come install Amazon for this one vacuum you want to buy to the idea of just saying, hey, come install Amazon now. If you don't give people a context or a clear reason that they would actually want to install your app, people just aren't going to do it, right? So I think the important thing here is that for apps that have clear content or have links or have things that you can actually route users to, it's much better to figure out what the right place is to take them, as opposed to just saying, hey, kind of generic ad can install the app.
Sure. Can you give us a use case, if you can, about someone that just did it really well versus someone who did it really horribly?
With using URX or just more generally using kind of local promotion?
I would say you pick.
Yeah, so I think, I'll be self-serving. Why not? So like again, one of the first vertical that we launched in just kind of to prove it because we thought the mobile ecosystem was maybe taking a step back. Whenever we think about different verticals, one of like the way we think about growth at URX is thinking about the kind of the frequency that an action happens on a mobile device compared to the basket size of that action happening. So like listening to a song or reading content or watching a video, very low basket size that happens very frequently. Booking a flight happens very infrequently but has a very high basket size, right? So you can imagine that kind of that gradient there. So for us, we decided to start with actions that happen very frequently that have smaller basket sizes. So for us, this was the Apple Musics, the Spotifys, the SoundClouds, the Ardios, the Pandoras. One of the things that we saw that was really interesting is just by being able to work with these companies and actually index their entire catalogs. What that enabled as a best practice for content creators was that they all then wanted to start covering all of the like most popular releases of new music as they were happening and actually write articles more early in kind of the development mode, so they could actually then promote the content that was trending more quickly. So a lot of things we saw was actually this massive uplift from viral sharing, where there's an article from Spin that on the day that Drake's album launched, they made like an order of 5 more on that day than they would make in like an average month because of the fact that that one article was shared like millions and millions of times, right? So it's that idea of letting them actually tap into the virality. It actually changed how they thought about content creation. So I think that was a big thing we realized is if you're a content creator and you're able to actually benefit from the upside of the things that you're writing about being viral, that was like actually changing the way that people are writing content or people are thinking about their own businesses.
That's a great point. Along that line of thought, how can we think about doing content smartly, both from a syndication and distribution standpoint, right? Because we're room full of startup founders who are eager to create great content, but we need an audience, right?
I think, it all depends on your use case, right? Just like any marketing initiative, this is, it's like you have to know what your action you're driving towards. So for content, it's generally lead generation type things. So if your goal of writing a blog post is to get somebody to sign up for your service, okay, make sure that you have very clear calls to action, that every blog post has whether it's accessed from your website or whether it's syndicated through something like Twitter or, other social platforms, that you could actually then always have links back to kind of both driving to the action as well as to other blog posts. So I think obviously just in the more broad SEO sense, the more links back to home, the better. But I think in terms of creating great content, I don't have any, particularly unique insights on that, other than the fact that, if you know why you're creating something in the first place, never really diverge from that, right? Those things I've noticed, especially in startups, is that people will make huge investments into like content creation, syndication, distribution, but they don't even have a clear call to action in the posts that they're paying TechCrunch $50,000 to promote, right? So if you're gonna invest money into a little time, make sure that you have a very clear way of even measuring whether that was successful.
John, it's really interesting what you just mentioned about frequency and basket size.
Yeah.
Don't mind following up on that. How did you decide on a frequency versus basket size? Was it just trying to get your product out to as many users as possible? And what kind of startups would you recommend looking at basket size versus frequency?
Yeah, so basically for us, a lot of that distinction was coming down to, again, from an ads model, if you're trying to figure out how do you drive conversion rate, for us was how do we actually figure out the right way of just getting the most amount of clicks first, right? And we didn't want to do that from a first principles perspective. We didn't want to do that by having a great link-based titles, but we wanted to actually put things in front of people that they actually wanted to click on. So when we thought about it, is okay, we looked at all the top, call it the App Annie stats and really just broad app usage stats, and it was very clear that there's basically things that people either have to pay once for up front or have to pay very nominal amounts for every time, or even better, free. Those things happen way more frequently, especially, right? So listening to music, videos, reading, etc., pictures, messaging, all those kind of things. So for us, that was kind of why we decided to start there. Is hey, let's get in front of these people that let's get things in front of people that they actually want to use to validate this kind of end-to-end pipeline of actually doing contextual recommendations and contextual search and stuff. So that was kind of why we decided to start there. The other side of the reality is that the things that happen a lot but don't cost a lot, those companies don't have a ton of money to spend, right? So someone like a Spotify isn't exactly your whale customer, So I think that was part of the reason for us to start to diversify. But because of the network effects that we're creating, so you have Spotify that gets you Spin, you have Spin that gets you Ticketmaster, you have Ticketmaster that gets you, sports content, or that gets CBS Sports that gets you, like local travel, for example. That was the thing that we were really trying to be thoughtful about. So I think generalizing that to everyone here, if you have a vertical-based go-to-market strategy, make sure that the verticals that you're picking have a cumulative benefit of scale, so that once you get your first one, it will help you get your second one.
Is Spotify paying on a CPA model?
So it works. We've done both, right? So the way that one of the nice things about how we work with our customers is that the hardest thing which we do uniquely for these people is actually basically index their content in full and consistently. So for someone like Spotify, they might have a always on evergreen CPA, and then they might have short 3-week flights of CPC campaigns to drive promotion of a new album, right? So for us, we're able to factor into both of those. Really what we're building towards is more of kind of a bid auction based approach where people can then just create a campaign for that new Drake album that launched 2 weeks ago, let that launch for 3 weeks, pay incrementally for people who are reading about Drake in East Coast, West Coast on iOS because they know those are the best users, and then let everything else fall back to CPA. So we try to blend CPC and CPA. We prefer CPC certainly because it's most favorable to publishers, and that's kind of a hard thing to balance when you have two sides of the marketplace.
I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Why does content? Why not products?
Yeah.
Why don't you sell just any arbitrary
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So so when you think about, so we're serving two masters here, right? So on the publisher side, so the people that show our adverts, those are content creators. That's stuff that you read. But when you think about our advertisers, we use content more in a semantic web sense. So there's many types of content that you can take many types of actions on. So you can, we think of a song in Spotify as a piece of content that you can listen to. We think of a something inside Amazon as a piece of content you can buy.
So you do?
Yes, we do it for everything. So today we work across music, movies, books, TV shows, travel, ticketing, hotels, airlines. Yeah.
Where is the content industry going? What models are you most impressed by? There's the Spotify walled garden type of thing. I've seen. What was it? I saw some publication where you could subscribe to it, and if you shared it with a friend, they as soon as they clicked the link, it was a 48-hour cookie. Where afterwards they had to return it to the library, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, what are any of those interesting to you? Where do you think content is going in general? Micropayments. Where is it headed?
So there's I think so again maybe separating it in terms of just pure brick and mortar Condé Nast versus kind of broad digital. So the Condé Nast model, it's towards just being able to work across a highly fragmented mobile ecosystem or just ecosystem in general, right? So today, the best stat I've read is 20% of BuzzFeed's traffic comes from Snapchat, right? Which you would never even expect, but it's because they have this new Discover tab that is basically a new kind of, what the Google AMP or Facebook Instant Articles is, that it's a new way of rendering content that makes it work really well inside Snapchat. So you think there's all these evolving models that it's going beyond just fetching a URL and displaying HTML, but actually new ways of skinning the content itself. That if you're a Condé Nast or any of these major content creators, you have to accept the fact that no one's going to your website to read your shit anymore. People are in another app doing something else. Might click on your article once, right? So the big problem this creates is then it's all high bounce traffic where somebody reviews one piece of content, clicks the X button and goes back into their feed, as opposed to reading that piece of content and then continuing to browse on your website. So I think the best practice we've seen on the kind of content creator side is actually, figuring out how do you make your stuff work everywhere and how do you make it load as fast as possible.
How do you make money?
So then exactly. So then on the other side, so for them, there's you touched on a few. There's the micropayment side. There's kind of the try before you buy, first click free kind of model. There's some of the sponsored content side. So some of the more interesting models I've seen have been on the sponsored content side. It's actually Pandora is doing a really cool initiative with this now, where they have basically an ad sponsored model where you can have, if you opt into watching a Ford ad, for example, Ford will pay for 60 minutes of free ad-based listening, right? And actually the result of what you see starting to happen there is that like people are like tweeting at Ford thanking them for the free music, right? So you think of like, what is the idea of like native advertising? I think it's been so overplayed that people think a native ad is just something that isn't a shitty banner at the top or the bottom. But really native advertising at its core is something that like, it adds value to your user base in a way that's in line with the reason people are actually accessing your stuff in the first place. So for Pandora, that's a really great native ad model. For other, sponsored content works somewhat. I don't think that's like by any means the tried and true model. We certainly think that like promoted actions is actually part of the future here, where again, if you can extend the usefulness of a piece of content beyond just reading it, we can actually take action on it. I'm reading about Drake, I can listen to Drake, I can buy tickets to Drake, I can explore more about Drake, right? We think that's also part of it. I think the reality though is that there isn't any like proven best practice here yet. I think when it comes to the other side, in terms of how somebody like a Spotify decides to make money, that's even more greenfield, right? Their supply chain is so messed up that it's gonna be a pretty uphill battle.
How has your business evolved since you first started it?
TLDR a lot. That's the nature of the beast, right? For us, when we sat down and kind of figured out, like, once we kind of had alignment around what the vision was of what we've set out to do, which is basically enabling the content inside apps to be discovered outside of those apps. Sounds like very simple, right? What we actually, after we kind of spec'd out and understood what that would mean, okay, we knew that there's like it was gonna be like a 2-year cycle of actually building out like a freaking like knowledge graph for apps that you could then like take contextual signals from a page and then search against that knowledge graph to find other stuff. That's like, there's a lot of really heavy tech that we had to build to do that. So the question was, okay, do we stay in stealth mode for 2 years and just kind of hope for the best? Or do we continue to find ways of like telling a story to the market and having products kind of that are adjacent to that North Star, while still like kind of building the underlying components that we would need to build this longer term business? That's certainly the way that we decided to go. So like for us, the first thing that we did was just even validate that linking into apps drove higher ROI than sending somebody to the App Store. So we said, okay, fuck it, we're not gonna go sign up Condé Nast, we're just gonna go sign up actually Living Social, who's our first customer. Living Social, Airbnb, Hotel Tonight, and Sidecar. So Living Social back that page, yeah. But basically, and saying to what we just said, we indexed their product catalogs, and then basically got like whitelisted sets of who their users were that had their apps installed. We basically just did like IDFA whitelist targeting, bought inventory on DSPs, super simple, had zero defensibility. But we proved the fact that linking somebody into an app actually had like a very meaningful ROI uplift than not doing it. So that was kind of first proving that we're not crazy, right? And then once we did that, we said, okay, we're able to like double down, raise more money, and really invest in some of the longer cycle things to actually enable us to then actually, start the process of building out like our core search and knowledge infrastructure. And then that took about, we had about 3 major releases on that got us to a point where we could actually have kind of the first version of our platform. But at that point, the question that we had that was an open, unanswered question at the point, to the point of native advertising, do people want us to be the ones actually creating the unit for them? So if we go to Condé Nast, do they want a special Condé Nast unit that a Condé Nast designer and engineer are gonna create for themselves? Or do they want a standardized unit that everybody, that kind of looks the same? So we weren't really sure the answer there. So the first thing we did was agnostic of the actual unit itself. It was just basically like the API and everything behind the API. And then very quickly, within about a month cycle, we realized, okay, people want like a unit on top of this. So then that was really the next kind of evolutionary phase of our business, which is kind of what you see today. It's kind of, I separate the two pieces almost like pre-search and post-search. And then in post-search, it's pre-unit and post-unit.
Why is it different from just like OG image? I didn't OG already solve that. Like Facebook Open Graph.
So what that solves is if you're trying to display a preview of a URL, you can use like the Open Graph tags to display the information. for us, the first hardest problem was how do you even figure out what URL to show for any given page based off of what it's about, right? So then once you do that, we use similar concepts of just like taking the meta tags on the page, or just downloading the page and showing that stuff, downloading it offline, showing it online. It's similar ideas, but the reason that one wouldn't work for us was just more about the actual search side of figuring out what link to show in the first place.
Through the expansion of the different buckets cumulatively, what have you found through the different verticals that has surprised you? Like you mentioned that you like the thesis of the high frequency, low basket.
Yeah.
Have you found any use cases in a high basket with low frequency that you see a lot of success in, or any other successes in particular verticals?
So one thing I didn't realize how important it would be was like, it's not just about like basket size isn't one thing, it's really like multiple things, right? So generally people, this is a very broad heuristic, and I'm sure you guys can poke holes, but like people don't buy things on their phones that cost more than like $100, right? So it doesn't, even you can split like commerce or retail into things that are like, $20 widgets versus things that cost like $200. That's actually why we worked so well with Living Social, is the average price point of things people would buy was, call it $20, $30, right? So I think the price distinction even within a single vertical was a big learning. Another thing that we didn't realize initially that is like now just so obvious was that like the same publisher, the same content creator actually then often satisfies many different types of action. So for example, Huffington Post is one of our clients. Huffington Post has 15 or 20 different sections of their site, right? So you can go to Huffington Post, and our like land and experience span strategy is, okay, let's go to Huffington Post. We're going to choose, like, if you think of like 3 dimensions, right? Let's fix the first dimension and just make it only United States. Cool. Then say, okay, we're only going to take off one of the sections of your site and only show like 1 or 2 action providers to start with. So literally the first thing is, hey, Huffington Post, we're going to take your Canada site and we're going to make it only show music on the music section, right? And they say, okay, cool, now Huffington Post reading, and that works great. Integration works well. Cool, we're just going to flip some switches on our side. Hey, guess what, guys? Now you have, on your music section, you have music and tickets and buying apparel about artists. Great. Hey, HuffPo, now let's go from just being in the music section to also being in your travel and in your like food section. Cool. And then the next thing we haven't cracked yet is then, hey, HuffPo, now we roll this out not just in Canada and US, but across your entire geo. Right? So that's kind of like how we think about our expansion even within clients, where really, if you think about it, there's only like 60 companies in the world that create basically almost every piece of content that we read. So if you can figure out a way to get into those people in the first place, it's not as much about an outbound sales perspective, but it's way more about like customer success and really growing business within that set of clients. Whereas the demand side is much more tried and true ad sales, where it gets way harder, way quicker, where you have to figure out how to stand out in a crowd of people that generally, from a marketer's perspective, are selling an undifferentiated set of products. You have to really figure out what is the thing that you're positioning about what you do that makes your product kind of stand out. Right? So for us, that's been unique access to high class inventory. It's been completely dynamic, creative, that's contextual to what users are reading about. The fact that it deep links and links to the mobile web. Those have kind of been the 3 pitch points for us that get marketers to answer our needs.
Can you talk a little bit about the experience of pitching and getting people initially in the pre-search days, and knowing that you have this great product that is on the horizon, but it obviously is not what you're actually pitching?
Yeah, so it's basically the vision cell and the value cell are like they're often at odds with each other, but like can have like multiplicative effects if done together. It works really well with investors too, where you can basically like it's kind of but the thing that has to stay true is that you have to have something that's actually unique. You can't just think that it's unique, right? So for us, even for when we first started, the thing that made what our product unique was dynamic creative that deep linked into apps. So that's what we sold. It's like, yep, we're buying inventory from the same place that every other person is buying inventory. Yep, we have like probably even less pricing control than anyone else does. But guess what? It deep links and it has dynamic creative. And that was enough to just get the first set of folks excited. And then once they could actually see how it worked, we could say, hey, here's like our broader vision for how this is going from what it is now over like our multi-year scope. Like if you're committed to like working with us as a partner, here's all the things that we'll give you early access to. Right? So the best situation is to be able to actually have your early clients and call your version 1 product be the people that give you feedback as you continue to evolve to make sure you're not just completely crazy. Because sometimes let's be real.
I'm curious if have clients been willing to share their first-party data? So hypothetically, if Spotify shares that I love Western music or something, and then all of a sudden you can pitch that to Ford and do F-150 campaigns to me all day long, right?
So people, marketers are in a general sense are okay with sharing, with using their own first-party data for themselves. So Spotify saying, hey, help me go find more people that like country music, right? They're not okay with actually sharing that data across with other companies. There's actually a certain business model which we call the DMP, which is like a company like a Blue Kai, which their whole business is actually selling to a company like Spotify to let Spotify make money from their unique data, but also enrich that data with other signals about those same users. So for us, we're only focused on using our signal that we're collecting ourselves, which is unique because you can't actually track users in just mobile web views. So that even if Spotify had the best user level data in the world, it wouldn't matter on mobile web. That's actually why we decided to choose there, is that to the point of having your unique advantage. That's the thing that we're the only game in town that can do that. However, yeah, they definitely. It's actually crazy. We had a client that from that version 1 days, a client that everyone has used many times on their phone and probably spent a lot of money on it. That's not Living Social. That they changed their marketing strategy and pulled off all spend, but they forgot to stop sending us their first party data. So they were literally sending us 10 million log events a day of just everything that every one of their users was doing for a year before actually doing a data audit and turning it off, right? So I think sometimes people are actually too liberal with that stuff.
Gotcha. How did you make how did you make the first $1,000? Did you take us through the slow motion?
I was on a phone with this guy named Ben Burns that used to work at Living Social. It was July 22nd of 2013.
And how long had you been working on it?
That was so we started February 1st. February 1st, and then the first couple months were wayfinding, and then basically actually started building what URX is today. Call it mid-March and April-ish, right? And then basically first people to actually turn on was Living Social.
How did you get that?
That was crazy. It was literally
how did you get to them?
How did we get to them? Think about that for a second. That was the first coolest sales sales effort that has ever happened.
Or what are the 9 sales efforts that failed before?
Part of it was actually for me it was actually the same thing with Living Social. I would just reach out to anybody that I knew that worked at any company that I thought would be a good partner for us. So I think I had
friends you networked.
Yeah, I had literally a friend that worked at Living Social, not in a marketing role, not in a UA role. And I just give me but I'm just hey, let me just show you what's let me just tell you guys what we're working on. Here's why we think it would work for you guys. Do you know anyone on this team who might be available? Okay, cool. Do you know someone else on your team that might know somebody who might know that person? And it might take 3 to 4 internal email or internal chats with somebody who isn't the decision maker to get me to that decision maker. It was actually same thing with Hotel Tonight as a friend. Jason Stein, right, who was just working as a market manager, just a friend from college that I kind of did. I didn't even know him that well, and just went over to their office, chatted with them, and got him excited about what we were doing enough to have him walk me over and introduce me to their UA person, right? And then that was how we got that business. The coolest one that we've ever had was with Apple. So the way that we got Apple was actually I sent an email to our investors and basically asked them if anyone knew any people on this one team or this one specific person. And I had 4 people that ended up saying yes. And then I coordinated it so that they all reached out to that same person within a 3-day period after I had sent him 2 emails myself they didn't reply to. And then after he got those 4 emails, he's all right, I get the freaking point. Just
stop annoying me.
Yeah, stop annoying me. Can you just get on the phone for 30 minutes? And then,
Yeah, I think that's really interesting here, right?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes companies like Google were so like product.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like the product sells itself at Google, right?
Yeah.
And
When you already have, or like I was on the offers team when I was there, right? And like when I first was on the offers team when I started, and like, yeah, it'd be like, oh yeah, we're gonna launch in Detroit. We're just gonna do a homepage promotion.
we'll have a billion users.
Yeah, exactly. So every person who does a search from Detroit will see an offers. It's like you don't have that distribution like just plug into, right?
Yeah.
You have to like to me that's like, at least from my experience, like that's what growth hacking is not necessarily about like, like we were talking earlier, like measuring the K factor of our blog posts, but really is about how do I like take advantage of the network and the people side of kind of what I've worked hard to build over the last 10 years and utilize that, right? How do I put authentic messages into the right channels of people and then have that be the thing that kind of helps proliferate who and what UX is.
So there was one example of what I guess Google is listening to unlearn or learn, right?
Yeah.
What other learnings do you have from?
I've got some. Oh gosh, we are on record, so I'll give the abridged version of it. I think it's there's no micro kitchens in startups, right? It's maybe the most real first one, but really what I mean by that is you can't expect or assume anything, right? Like if you're doing a startup and you're 4 people in a basement, there's nothing that you can take for granted, and there's no like infrastructure for you to build on, right? The first 2 introductions I had, one was to a lawyer and one was to a bank. On the first day of URX, that was like all we had. I had like a Google Apps account for our domain, and I had a lawyer, and I had a company incorporated. That was like literally it. I had no idea where to start. I think if you're coming from, depending on like how long you've been at Google, I think you start to think about the world in narrower and narrower slices, right? Like if you're a engineer on Apple, that literally what that means is that you work on like one tier of like a 7-tier service-oriented architecture that like does one thing at like 10 million times per second, but you don't actually think about like the entire system, right? So I think you have to like really force yourself to take a broader like system level view and really like force yourself to zoom out and care about both like the macro and the micro level. Right? That was, I think, a big one that was super obvious to start. But I think as was just talked about, distribution is like, when you're working at a company like Google, the hardest thing is usually the thing itself. It's like, what are you building and why is that like super, super gnarly, right? Like, when you're working at a startup, that's actually like the wrong way to think about it, because you can't assume distribution, right? The hardest part is always going to be distribution until distribution's not the hard part anymore. And then that's usually when there's a lot of other things you don't have to worry about too. So I think like figuring out where you get your first $1,000, where you get your first 10,000 users, like that's the real hard stuff that is like super not obvious when you come from like the most well-run machine that like the tech industry has ever created. I think I can go on, but I'll keep it at that.
How's your day changed in terms of when you first started versus maybe?
Yeah, for sure.
What did you focus your time on? But then,
Yeah.
what did these do?
So it's evolved like completely. So it's like, again, I'm a framework guy, right? So for me, it's like there's like 2 parts of the company. There's like maybe 2 or 3 parts of the company. It's like before you know what product market fit is, and before is like really maybe the one that actually matters. And like the way that you operate is completely different, because before your only job is to figure out what product market fit is, which is like customer development, sales, talking to literally as many people as you can. Then after that, it's all about how do you scale the company, right? So whereas in the early days, my life was literally figuring out based off of like my network, any person that I know's network, how can I just get in front of people who I think are the people who I'm trying to like get to use their service. Whereas today, it's like, okay, we have a like 33-person team. It's now just basically dealing with problems, right? So, I'm just like the, chief psychologist, and like, decision, I try to not make decisions, but like, or try to only make very few decisions, but the ones that I do are usually like really, really, really important. So it's like trying to like enable others to think the same way that I do about the business, but like in a way that they don't have to keep asking me questions, right? So it's a very different, where now it's all about, it's much more internal focused, but with like a very it's a different set of external stuff where now it's like more like recruiting and things like that. Whereas like the internal job is now maybe 2/3 to 75% of my job. Whereas before it was like 80, 90% was external focus. I think that's like, I'd say the biggest difference.
You mentioned your board earlier.
Yeah.
How did you go about picking your investors, your advisors, or what kind of advice as you're starting to build your company?
Yeah, so there's framework. There's two types of investors, ones that add values and ones that don't. For the ones that do add value, there's ones that are like business or product centric, right? So like an example is, generally later stage investors are people who come from a finance background, MBA background, haven't been like product builder types, are the ones that will help you think about things like, literally think about your business from like a P&L or type of perspective. Whereas the other, the product people are people who are like ex-founders or have built companies or been operators before, will help you figure out like, I have this one really acute problem. How do I actually solve it? Or how do we actually grow from our next order of magnitude, right? It's very rare to find people who can do both, but they're out there, right? So for us, for our seed round, we did the stereotypical YC, everybody in the farm kind of round. We're literally raised from like 30 investors. Part of our thesis behind doing that, knowing that I was going to take on a massive amount of just like investor management, which is a thing and it's a huge pain in the ass, like seriously. But our whole approach was, okay, we're like early to a market that we believe is going to have a very long life cycle and is going to be very important. We want to very literally starve the market so that every investor will turn down everyone else that comes to them with this idea, because it's like a really freaking good idea. And we want to make sure that we have eyes and ears everywhere so that people tell us when there's new people on the street. It worked. Like literally, it made other people who like even just said the word deep linking really hard to like find the same people who we talk to. Granted, that doesn't mean that there's other very successful companies that do deep linking that do completely different things than we do. But it gave us eyes and ears so you could understand how the market was developing and really gave us a set of advocates that helped out. So that was part of our approach there, was let's get a wide set of people with like very strong, like a select group of very strong institutions who can also then help us kind of get through to our next round. So yeah, about half of the money was from angels, half was from people who had like seed or larger funds. And then for our Series A, also we went with an institutional, that was actually an outsider from our seed round but that we had kind of stayed in touch with. So again, for our Series A, our lead investor, Excel, did about 75% of it, and then we had pro rata for the rest of it to the existing investors. So we chose Rich, who is the only outsider on our board today, because of the fact that he was one of those rare people that both was an operator and could like help me understand how to like build a very viable long-term business. Where we went from making that same $1,000 maybe in like a month to making that like an hour, right? And how does that order of scale change just like what you build, right? So that was kind of how we chose Rich and the folks we worked with. I think more generally, the biggest thing that's like, I don't think people like give credit to enough as a board member is literally like, it's like an employee that you can't fire. So make sure that it's somebody that you want to be in your ear consistently. Otherwise, like I have a lot of friends who've made like really poor choices because they chose for the wrong reasons. Like if you're like, we had a situation for, that is very real where we had one term sheet with a higher valuation and a higher amount of money, and then another that was lower valuation from Rich. We ended up going with Rich because I believe that he would be like a better partner through whatever the heck life would throw at us.
So you're in the mobile space, and a lot of us have been facing headwinds, right?
Sure.
Like mobile distribution is kind of dead.
Yeah.
Retention is really hard.
Yeah.
How do you think about this, right? Any advice you can give us?
I think this is very non-self-serving by definition, but don't rely on UA, like paid UA. It's just it's like crack, right? It's like as soon as you stop, you just need more of it. I'm not speaking from experience here, but I've heard, I think, building just a product that people want to use consistent, even just taking a step back, knowing what your core metrics are, right? So I've spent time and understood a lot of how Pinterest thinks about this, and I really like their approach here, where they think about the world in terms of what they call like XD28s, where they think about for any given user cohort, they think about the user retention in terms of the number of days out of a 28-day period that they're engaged with the product. So then they can actually then have cohorts by retention on that XD28 kind of cycle. So that kind of help them understand, okay, we have 10 different marketing channels, or we had 10 different email blasts. How does each of those then actually lead to like different depths of involvement with our product? I think that when it's like, before you even think about like the surface level things like push notifications, email strategies, paid stuff, it's I think really important to even understand like why do the people that use your product actually use it, but also what is like a realistic engagement rate for your product, right? So for something like Snapchat, they measure daily active users, right? For them, literally success is if somebody using their product like to send like 20 snaps per day. For Pinterest, it's not as long of a cycle, but you sure as hell better be using it more than call it 12 times a month. Otherwise, you're not a good user to them, right? You have something like Amazon. If you make a purchase on Amazon every 2 months, they're great, right? You have companies that help users get loans for cars that they can use to buy Uber, like to drive on Uber. You might only need that person to be active every 6 to 12 months, right? So I think knowing even what the expectation is, or like what does a good user look like first, to then help you understand what are the tactics or what are the core product tweaks that you have to make users more engaged, and then you can lead out to marketing, right? So I think when I think about retention, I think it's much more of a product problem more so than a marketing problem, almost like 8 out of 10 times.
So how did you find your co-founders as well as recruit your first employees? How do you sell them on this whole idea and vision?
Yeah, totally. So I had 3 other co-founders, so 4 of us total. We all went to UCLA together, so that was kind of the base that we had. So 3 of us were in the same fraternity, and one of the 4th person was in the same major as one of the other 3. We didn't start this out of college or anything, but for me it was just more about like always trying to build good relationships with, and really genuine relationships with like frankly everybody. But I had laid the groundwork of just like friends during college, and then I think it was 2 years after college was when I really started to like get serious about the next step in my career, which was wanting to start a company. And that's when I started kind of reaching back out to all of my friends, similarly to how we found our first clients, and just figuring out, hey, like, here's what I'm interested in. What are you interested in? What have you learned in the last couple of years? What do you want to do next? Do you know anyone else who's looking to do X, Y, and Z? I just had that same kind of conversation, just like on repeat. And then sure enough, it ended up being like some of my closest friends who were the people that had a very highly overlapping interests as well as like complementary skill sets. I did not study computer science in undergrad, but like the rest of the people I work with did, or studied majors that had a very heavy computer science component. I taught myself how to code while working at Google. I'm not nearly as good at it as they are. So I think, but they're not nearly as good at go-to-market, business, sales, fundraising, all that kind of stuff as I was. So it's a very clear fit, right? Once we first identified who those people were, they said, okay, how do we prove it? So the first one was Andrew, who was like my closest personal friend of this kind of group of people. And then we kind of, once I got him bought in, then it was like, hey, like, what's this? We have no idea what we're going to co-found, but at some point we're going to co-found something together. And then it was like, okay, how do we A, figure out what the thing is, and B, figure out who else we want to do it with. And then basically the next year was just literally like hackathons every weekend, talking about many different ideas during the week, bringing in a whole bunch of different friend circles to those hackathons, and then keeping the best folks across the way. I'd say now, from the people who we did hackathons with before we started the company, maybe 7 of them are people we actually ended up hiring over the longer term. Because again, the most important signal for hiring somebody is like if you've worked with them before and you know that they're great, awesome. When we looked at the first, I guess 5 people we hired, Three of them are people who we worked with before. Actually, the first three people that we worked with. One was one of my close friends from Google. The second two were my CTO Andrew's like best friends from his prior job, and then the next two were folks that we got through referrals, either through Hacker News or through kind of that group of folks. And then once you have like 10, it's kind of when there's a critical mass of like really forcing the people to actually think about building this beyond just like the product, but think about the people behind the product. And hey, let's go through your LinkedIn. Let's figure out all the people you think might be a good fit. Yeah, that person looks great, but do you think they're really ready to join a 10-person company that is still figuring stuff out? And sure enough, you end up with like every person had their own list of like 2 or 3 people, and then you have a list of like 25 to go super, super hard. Right? And that's kind of how it worked for us. We've tried a lot of the other more promotional things. Most of them didn't work very well. I think, as anyone will say, referrals almost always will be the best. Once you get to a certain critical mass, then you have to think about breaking out of that network. Otherwise, you have like an echo chamber.
How did you set milestones at the beginning beyond just working like as much as you could?
Yeah. I mean, that was we didn't do a super good job at that, to be honest. I think it was always very growth focused. So we just kind of knew what metrics we wanted to see growing. But something that it's taken me 3 years to get good at is like, how do you actually set the right goals? Right. So not in the, okay, sure, everyone knows OKRs, but like, what is the actual like KR kind of thing, right? Where it's like, okay, sure, no shit, we want to grow revenue, but am I supposed to grow, do we want to grow revenue like by a factor of, 25%, or do you want to grow it like, 80%? And how do you even know which is appropriate? The worst thing, and one of my biggest personal learned lessons as a founder is managing expectations, because there's 3 levels of that. The hardest is managing your own personal expectations, but then second to that is managing the teams and managing your board's expectations. If you mess up on any of those 3, it makes life a lot harder. And when in doubt, always like sandbag. So for me, what I realized is I'm very optimistic. So like whatever I think is actually realistic, I cut it in half, and then that ends up being a little bit more realistic. So I think like, and that's not because like our team's not performing. It's because I think I have to believe that what we're going to be continue exploiting in growth. Otherwise, like, what's the point? Right?
You can add your spouse to it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Fair point.
How transparent are you about that at all? The team members, like how you guys are tracking, do like dashboards or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's also been another big learning is like how much to share. So like this is a very theoretical thing, but like I think as like a founder or as like a founder CEO, you're the only person in a company that as it grows like that understands like the absolute truth. And what I mean by that is like I'm not actually on the front lines of doing most things today, but I hear all of the goods and the bads of everything that's happening everywhere, to a point where I'm the only person that can understand like the more abstract things, like this is working or this is not working, or like we're spending too little or too much money, right? Like the very, very broad things. There's like only certain things that I can understand, and it's like the hard part is understanding how much of that am I supposed to share with different factions, right? Like how much do you tell the team about what I know is the absolute truth versus like how much do you tell like the management team about that, right? And as I've matured as a leader, I've realized that increasingly more, it's like the more close to the absolute truth that you share, generally speaking, the better off you are. There's a lot of stuff that you don't want that's like just not appropriate to talk about. But in terms of like expectations or hitting towards your growth goals, it's actually better to like share that stuff early so that the team knows like where they actually stand. Right? The worst thing, remember this one thing that happened very early in our growth where I knew that there's this one competitor that whenever they'd get on a sales call, they would tend to win, or if we were ever in a head-to-head, they would actually like perform as well, if not a little bit better. Right? And then a month later, I remember talking to one of our lead engineers, and that person thinking that we were just like hand over fist beating these people every single time, and we're just eating their lunch too, right? And me actually telling them, no, like that's actually not the reality. That's like not how the world works. In fact, this is actually a more accurate portrayal of the truth. It completely changed that person's perception, not only of that competitor, but also of like ourselves and what we built, right? Where, you know, a lot of the like harder trade-offs of like, you know, building things that add value today that might not be the most beautiful solution versus things that are the right solution that take a much longer time frame. Because that person knew that we were in a head-to-head battle, they were way more comfortable making decisions that helped us today because they knew that today really mattered. Whereas before, because they thought we were just crushing this other person, they're like, well, why do we need to like care about what's our release for next week when we have this really awesome thing that's going to hit the product in 3 months, right? So that was a big change there.
Was there ever a person or like a person that you hired where you felt like, okay, this is no longer like startup, this is like a real company? Like maybe you hired someone older or more senior, like where it's like, it's no longer like the hackathon project. This is wow. And maybe it was, I mean, not just raising money, but like particularly a hire where you felt like, oh, okay, this person's like smarter than me or something. Like I need to, we need to be really serious now. We just convinced this really smart person to work with us. Like
there were, let's see. The short answer is yes. I'm trying to think of like, there's a couple points. So let me just give me a second to think about that.
You didn't owe people in your company, Michael?
No.
You hate old people?
No, I was just having that. It's like, I'm there right now. It's like, we're just like 4 bros. And so at some point, we're going to hire a grown up. But like, I'm going to be their boss. And it's like, that's weird.
So like, I think the biggest one, the biggest mindset changes were people, there's a lot of people now that at Google would have been like, my boss's boss's boss. Like,
right.
literally though. That was a big change because it's kind of like, what value do I add to this person's career versus like how much am I learning from them? That was a big mindset shift. But then again, the way that like I self-rationalized was the fact that again, like I have the most context about what we're doing or of anyone in the world, and this person's job is to apply what they're the best at in the world to that vision, right? So once I realized like my job is to kind of steer them in the right direction, it really changed that perspective. But also, you know, a really real and important point, gender diversity was also like really, really important, right? Where we started as, you know, 4 male founders. Within the first 10, it was still all male. Today, it's now about a third female, 2/3 male, with 2/3 of my management team being females. Right? And that was that was a really important shift for us to make, because if you don't have I'm just using diverse in every sense, meaning like every single way that humans can be diverse from each other. If you don't have a diverse team, you're gonna like have groupthink happen super quickly, and you're actually not gonna have you're not gonna continue to think forward, right? You're just gonna like accept whatever your own version of the status quo is for whatever that is today.
Can we actually talk about that a little? Because I think that's like the right, nice thing to say for like PR. I've also heard like PayPal, the PayPal team was like all white dudes. And then after PayPal, they all went and founded unicorns, and like most successful team ever. And like there's an essay written about like how homogeneity was so good for them. Because like, they didn't have arguments, everyone saw the world the same way. They said, all right, here's the thing to solve.
I think there's a difference between early team and just like a team at large, right? Where, I mean, even Paul Graham would say like a predictor of success was how similar the founders looked to each other. Which like super creeped me out, but it was like actually true, because the company literally down to like the type of style that the people wore, like the things people wore. Like there was like that was actually, if you look today, the companies that were like more similar, like authentically, actually performed better, because they in those early days, they like the things that they would disagree about were much narrower in scope. Right. Really about like what they were building, not about like the mindset behind what they're building. Right.
So how do you resolve? Yeah.
Well, I think, but there's a point where it shifts, where, you know, again, whether it's like 5, 10, but some number that's less than probably 15, it's important to like kind of remove those pointers, right? Because like when you're starting to, if your team is not representative of the customer base that you're serving, like you're going to underserve that customer base, right? And I'd say, you know, almost every single product is going to be serving, you know, not just, you know, like for us, it was like, 4 white dudes that all went to UCLA and were in a frat together, right? Like that's like not our core audience by any stretch of the imagination. It was just the reality of those were people that I could like get access to most quickly, right? So like, but it changes the culture really meaningfully as well, right? In a way that's like so additive and in ways that I wouldn't even imagine. Where having like people's communication styles, I'd say was the first thing that was like a big change, because like there's just even the way that people communicate like shifts both how it really shifted how decisions were made in the company, right? Where I'm a pretty like direct, honest, open person, but there's a lot of people on our team who like weren't, right? And a lot of that realizes like very specifically we had this. I was like, okay, well, I want to be the type of leader that whenever somebody doesn't agree with something, they can just speak up about it and just tell me and we can fix it. And I realized like very quickly, oh shit, a lot of people, in fact, probably more people than not, aren't comfortable telling their boss that they don't agree with the decision they make. So that's just not going to fly, right? Okay, wow, we need to figure out how do you like have like a blind way of letting people give feedback that isn't them having the gall to like sit across from you at a table and tell me they don't agree with you. Like, because that was a big shift that happened by having actually a more diverse group of people on the team. Also, one thing that happened that I hated, but it was just a reality, is that like, especially in those early days when it was like an all male under 30 audience, is people were making like really inappropriate jokes. And I'm not that's not like the type of person that I am, but like it just would happen like as a natural byproduct of people being in either social situations that they were drinking, or like just in general people just being kind of like really comfortable with each other, to a point where then when we actually started to have like really strong like females and female leaders, that just went away. Where it was very different from me saying, hey, don't say that, that's like not appropriate to say, which I've said from day one, to actually having it be self-regulated, right? Where just even people having that awareness about the fact that like I have to be like, I'm in a professional environment, I'm not just hanging out with my buddies. That really changed the conversation in a way that I wouldn't have expected, but that was like really, really important.
What about some of the like cultural tone that you guys set early on, and as you've grown now? Obviously, some things have changed as your team's changed, but how do you maintain the culture as you get bigger and get more insulated from the rest of the team?
That's the other side. That's like the other side of the coin, right? Where I think that there's a natural evolution that has to happen in order for like a company to maintain its best possible self. But there's also things that just make the company who it is, right? And it's not like having cultural values or phrases that you put on your wall, but it's like it's how you operate, it's how you act, right? Where literally it just sounds silly, but it's true. I like one of our cultural values, which we call startup art, which is like the idea of the fact that when you're working at a startup, there's a lot of shit you have to do that you don't have to do when you work at a big company. That was like, we represented that with this idea of being startup art, right? And like part of how I wanted to try to teach that to everybody was that on the and everybody's start date, I would pull an all-nighter the night before, just so that to like prove a point to this person that you're going to work harder than you've ever worked in your entire life because you're a part of the startup. That didn't scale like, but like I think part of it is you have to, the way that one of my friends, Max, who's one of the co-founders of Instacart, he has the best example of this that I've ever heard. What they do is they have their cultural tenets, or the things that made Brandon and Purva and Max really good as co-founders, and they have like 6 like canonical stories that represent like who they are as a team, that they use those stories to explain their values, right? So for them, I think that there's like 2 of the ways that they maintain culture are through the office environment that they create and the way that they actually like physically relate to each other, as well as through like having these like really clear stories and like that maintain the idea of who Instacart has been since they were 3 people in South Park to now being a 400-person company that's taken over the world. I think having that like those like stories is so much more important.
What were the 3 things that shocked you after you left Google in the first 10 months?
10 months. So just like the like OpEx, like the idea of like having to care about OpEx, like it sounds silly, right? But like when we started, we had like $30,000 in a bank account, and that was like what we started with, right? Whereas now, like our OpEx is like will be like $30,000 like a day, right? Like, granted, that's not our burn rate, just to be clear, but like, you know, we still got, you know, we're spending money because we have a large team of like very senior engineers that are building the thing that we're building, right? Just like how OpEx scales and how you have to be careful of like OpEx versus revenue growth. That idea is something that like you never have to think about how much money your team is spending. Like that's just not even like a thing, right? So like really having to like, it's not like, again, the Google approach to the problem is cool. We have this great new feature, like, or this great new like spec. All right, great. We're gonna, you know, hire a director who's gonna have a, you know, $N million P&L. They're gonna go hire a team and just go do this thing, right? That's great. Go do it, right? Just like not how it works, right? There's every single decision you make is a trade-off, and that's never how it felt when I was at Google. So I think that's maybe like part one. I think part two, and you know, this is obvious at Google, but it's also an assumption, is like the importance of hiring, right? So everyone, okay, like same thing with Google, right? Google has probably every single person who's ever applied for a job in any single tech company. Google, they've probably also applied to Google, right? Thank you. So truth serum,
yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, you know, they, you know, when I was hired there is because somebody, like, I applied for a job I didn't get, and then they like reached out to me 2 years later for another job that fit my criteria, and I applied and I accepted, right? That was like, you don't have that luxury in startup, right? So I think like how much you have to actually like invest into recruiting always that's never something you have to do when you're like just focused on being a product manager, just focused on like the product side, right? And it's funny now because when I talk to people who, you know, go to work at, again, a company like a Snapchat or something where they're in like a super hyper growth mode, the biggest thing that like people are like overwhelmed by is that, you know, they went from being like high level product manager at a company like a Facebook to now being a high level product manager at a company like Snapchat. The biggest difference in responsibility is now they actually have to go hire, right? You have to go like hire people. And that's like the biggest difference, at least from their perspective, of like what it meant to work as an executive at a big company versus an executive at a small company. So I think you're always hiring in any situation, no matter what it is. That's a big game changer for me, right? I think the third one, and this one's a little bit more like funny, I think, is maybe just like that I have to be my own. I don't have a comms department, let's put it that way, right? Where it's like, you know, whereas your MBA people want to get these like speaking invites and stuff, and like I couldn't do it because I had to like ask the comms person at Google whether it was okay. There's never a single time when anyone ever said yes, right? So, like, just like, right? Whereas now it's like, oh yeah, you got, you know, like cool. There's like, you know, some event that I can talk at that's like in front of our core audience, and like, oh wow, like I can use this as a chance to like preach to the choir. Like, okay, yeah, cool, I'll go do it. But with great reach comes great responsibility, right? Where if I say the wrong thing, like I'm hurting my own cause in a big way, right? So I think it's like to the point of just like growth marketing in general, like, you know, the brand marketing is the 50% marketing that you can't determine the value for, but you know it's important. It's like the how you get your brand out there. That's like something that as a founder you have complete control over. Whereas like when you work at a company like Google, that's like expressly taken away from you, right? Where you have zero control over how you represent your brand. Whereas when you work at a startup where you are a founder, you are your own brand, right? And that was a huge change in mindset.
So going back to growth, and it's maybe awesome since you just see a lot of data from publishers and you know a lot of the platforms.
Yeah.
If you were to do growth hacking, where do you think is the undiscovered opportunities? Is it going through long tail sites? Is it, you know, is it Instagram? Is it, you know, what would you recommend?
Even further, like what happens when you're like a 3 to 6 month startup founder, right?
Yeah, where do you prioritize? Yeah.
So the again, super naive, but so I try to keep it simple and push with details, right? So like pre-post product market fit. That's always gonna be the first question. If you're pre-product market fit, none of that shit matters. Don't even think about marketing until you have a product that your initial customers actually like, right? It's like if I'm creating like chewable coffee and like the first 100 people that eat it hate it.
Disgusting.
Yeah, it's terrible. Like this thing doesn't work at all. Like like it gives me a stomach ache. I missed work for 3 days. Like, what the hell are you guys doing? The biggest problem isn't to go get another 100,000 people to go use your product, right? You have to fix your fucking product. I've been saying that tomorrow.
Let's say you're like,
Yeah.
I'll be on a flight.
but like, make sure your product has to be the thing that does the marketing, especially in the early days, right? When it comes to retention, it's like if people aren't, if your users aren't being retained, it's not because like you don't have a great marketing strategy. It's because they don't like your product, right? And I think that's the hard reality when, in that, especially in those early days, it's like you don't know. You have to like, as a founder or as an early start employee, you have literally every lever that you can possibly pull. The hardest thing is to just reduce the scope of what you think about to figure out the most important things at any given time. And before you have a product that people love, that's the only thing that matters, because there's no way of sustainably growing something that's shitty, right? You'll have a leaky bucket, which is like probably the worst fate that's ever plagued VCs, you know? So I think but once you have that, you have to figure out, like, again, who are, like, you have to really know who your users are and where they hang out, right? I remember, actually, what company it was, someone in our, one of our people in our YC cohort, they realized early on, it'd be better if I remember the specifics, but they realized quickly that their initial audience were stay-at-home moms. That they didn't really know why that was their audience. They just realized that was who their audience was. And they went around and figured out, like, okay, how the heck do we get in front of more stay-at-home moms? They found like news, like trade letters. They found local organizations. They found like blogs that were specifically tailored to that audience. So for me, instead of thinking, I don't think that, especially in the early days, it's not about the channel that you address. It's way more about the audience that you're addressing, right? Because there's the same audience might be highly fragmented across multiple channels, or it might be more consolidated across like 1 or 2 main channels, right? The easy thing if you're an app developer, Facebook, start there. But I think really understanding who your audience is always going to be the first hardest problem if you're in those kind of first 6 months.
How do you feel about the current investing climate?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you have a company that doesn't have a strong business model, yeah, it's not a good time to be a founder.
I think one thing that's good to mention though is that Google actually, like, the reason they succeeded so hard is because they were in a general bear market. Yeah,
absolutely.
And Google was like making actual money.
Yep.
And so they were just hiring all the most talented people from like big companies, small companies. Everyone was just going to Google. Sometimes like the bear market is like the best time for
you to stand out.
Or what's that?
For you to stand out then.
Yeah.
So I think it's not like, fun dynamics, people, I've heard from people up here before, right? That, it's not that okay, there's, what I think will happen is highly subjective, 2 cents, if not less. It's like, over the next 5 years, there'll be like a lot of funds that just go away, right? So there'll be like way less like funds in the market. The general amount of money available will probably decrease, but not by the same magnitude that the number of funds will. Meaning there'll be a consolidation of money into the funds that are actually worth LPs investing in. But you're in this weird squeeze period now where you have all these people who have money to invest. But the way they're evaluating investments is going to change, right? Where suddenly it's not just about like, because someone else invested in it and it sounds like a good idea, or I think that it could be cool if they had these 5 proof points, but we're actually going to be more scrutinous, because whereas if you're a founder, you have to always think about every fundraise as the last money you'll ever raise, which is a very like weird thing to think about. You have to like plan as if you'll never raise another dollar. As an investor, that's actually how they're starting to think about things too, right? Where investors are now thinking, if I only had this last fund, if this is my last fund, is this a company that I want to be a part of it? Which is a very different change than somebody whose incentive is to invest in 15 to 30 companies a year and will like try to think about it that way, right? So the portfolio structure is changing in terms of where people are investing in new investments. And because, think about it from a venture capitalist perspective, like Okay, like if you're in like first round, like last fund or 2 funds ago, it doesn't really matter what company you were. If you weren't Uber, it would have been better for first round to invest all of that money into Uber, right? Like they would have made way more.
Put your headset.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I think that there's like, there's like the
Were you in that realm?
no, fortunately we were around after. Right? We could still make our mark, right? But the like how again like just the like people's fund strategy is changing, right? And I think but it doesn't really, if you're a founder, that shouldn't really change much unless don't have a business, right? If you have a good business, just keep doing what you're doing, right? And you will persevere. However, you have to think, and Paul Buchheit says this best. It's like you have to like think like a cockroach, right? It's like you can't if you are not default alive. I don't know, like if you haven't read that blog post, read that blog post like tonight. Paul Graham, default alive or default dead. It's literally like if you took the amount of money, took your revenue ramp, you take your OpEx, you take money you have in the bank, is the amount of money you need to get to being profitable more or less than the amount of money you have in your bank. Super, super simple. If your default debt, meaning that you need more than you have to fix your shit to get to default alive. Otherwise, like you're not going to be in a fundable place, right? And that's the reality is that, people, I think the mindset is, has always been, or at least in the last 5 years, it's been like growth at all costs. Whereas now it's kind of like unit economics at all costs, right? Where investors don't just care about the top line growth, they care about like the actual underlying makeup of how your dollars and cents add up.
So initially I was asking you as an entrepreneur, as a businessman making revenue for URX, how do you feel about the investment climate, considering maybe like app developers that are your customers might not be there in 2 years?
Fortunately, it's not as bad for us because we're very, very head concentrated at this point. So on the supply side, so again, all of our publishers, it's all companies that have been around for like over 100 years.
Like a company.
Yeah, Condé Nast, right? On the demand side, it's like we specifically chose the head and the head first approach where we'll launch a vertical. We'll launch like retail with eBay, Amazon. Right? We'll launch like music with Apple and Spotify. Right? So for us, there's like a set of companies that will be resilient across any climate. I'd rather work with those people versus having to go a long tail strategy on the demand side where you're dealing with, Joe Schmo app that has raised $2 million and is growing fast or slow enough, depending on how you think about it, that they have to spend 1.5 million of that on UA. Right? So I think for us, that's not as bad, but I think more broadly, when you look at like the marketing climate or the MarTech, ad tech climate, there's going to be a massive consolidation that happens because people are just don't, if you're doing like performance marketing, you're trying to track against a cost of sale, right? It's all return on ad spend based. So if people are spending less money because you're in a downturn, people are buying less things. If people are buying less things, people are spending less money on marketing, which means that they need to spend less money across many channels, which means more money goes to like Facebook, which is basically the reality for mobile today. Right? So I think there's gonna be a lot of like gaming companies that consolidate, gaming advertising type companies. I think that the ones that work will stay true though.
Cool. So trying to take the opposite view of what's happening with the investing climate, right? So if you're trying to invest in the opposite of where a lot of investors are trying to go for unit economics first type startup, doesn't mean there's an opportunity for investors to look at, hey, great team, they will only have a profitable company in 3 years' time and then invest in those teams. Is that?
I think yes, the bar is going to get higher, right? Where I think a lot of the time for the right reasons, founders get the benefit of the doubt if they have only a founder story. It's like founder and market story. Depending on how competitive of a round you're raising, like how many other investors might invest if this one doesn't, like people will give you the benefit of the doubt. I think that the bar is going to get higher. So if you have a business model that won't turn in for 3 years and you have a product that's like pre-fit, okay, well, have you actually built this kind of a product before, and do you have experience building teams? I would imagine will be more of kind of the way of the sword. But again, I'm purely speculating, so I'm not sure.
So where's URX in 3 years' time?
3 years' time. So I mean, for us, what independent of what we think about what we do in terms of 2 levels. There's the product that we have in market today, right? And then there's kind of the platform underneath that product. So the platform is our knowledge graph and search platform, whereas we have this product called AppViews, which is kind of the first consumer of that platform, right? Our longer term strategy has been and will always be to basically then open up that platform for any developer to use for any reason to be able to either just enable users to discover information across fragmented ecosystems, mobile or otherwise, or to just do things with it that we couldn't even imagine. Right? So we actually, one of the post-search per-unit kind of examples was like, the first thing we did was build our API, right? Because we weren't sure what the unit would look like, so we thought just the consumer would be somebody who would use our API directly. 3 years down the road, I expect our second business unit to be more on a consultative basis, where we'll go and work with large companies that we'll sell into, who will want to do really interesting and unique things with our API itself, right? So I think if you can have this first sustaining business that helps you build the profitability, where you're actually able to build the full vertical stack ourselves. The second version is then taking the core of the actual information retrieval pipeline and really hard knowledge alignment stuff that we do today, like figuring out that Justin Bieber in Spotify is the same as Justin Bieber in SoundCloud is the same as the one in CPU core stuff. That's the hard stuff that we do, right? So what are the other use cases beyond our own ad business that we can use that for? There's a lot, right? I've only recently started talking to third-party companies about what those could be, but we're still 6, 12 plus months away from actually being able to deliver on that. The hardest thing to figure out, personally, I still don't have a good answer to, is when do we launch a second product, right? Because it changes the mindset when we go from, again, post product market fit to pre-product market fit. And as soon as you launch a second product, you're having 2 different mindsets in the company, where half the company is trying to figure out this new thing that's unknown, and the rest of the company is figuring out how to scale something that's already very obvious, right? So that's a really scary divide. It's also that's part of the reason that you talk to investors, right? Is that it's a good story to tell. Well, we need more money to do blank, right? We need more money, So we'll look the same until it's we're damn well sure we know exactly that right move, and have them maybe call it, and then no one would read about it or hear about it until we have the first 5 marquee clients already lined up and using the thing, so that we could launch with some real great use cases.
Does your knowledge graph and user intent kind of make you a DMP ultimately?
Well, it could be, right? But that's not really we don't want to. I think selling user data isn't. We don't think that's the biggest opportunity in the space. I think more realistically, being a data enriching information is really interesting. Where again, talking to some of these bigger companies, anybody that has a social graph, right? They might understand They might understand users based off of the for them, their interest has the other activity of users on their graph and how those users either have co-occurrence data or have interacted with each other, right? So, Facebook knows how each of us should be related to each other. They might be able to cluster us based off of the types of content that we engage with, but they don't really know that the reason that Ricky and I are like each other are because we really, really like the Golden State Warriors. Well, okay, maybe not Facebook because you really like things, but Snapchat doesn't know that we're like each other because we consume content about the Warriors and airplanes, right? So if you can actually bring go from having a soft entity graph, which is more kind of like a recommendation engine, to having a hard entity graph, which is actually knowing kind of like Netflix does. It's because you watch this one thing, you might also like these other things.
Right.
That kind of a shift is where we see people start to get most interested about us today. So it's really, but it's such an abstract thing that we actually have to coach people to even understand that. Because really that's the magic behind how what we do today works. So it's like way less obvious to people who haven't been thinking about it for 3 years, you know?
Yeah, very cool.
So when did you feel like you had product market fit in the initial phase, right? It's a pretty deep engineering
It's like-
product.
It's like the joke would be, you know, yesterday, but also like, you know, 3 years ago, you know, I joke only because like, you know, there's not like a binary, I don't think it's a binary thing where it's like you have product market fit and then you're kind of done, right? It's like you're always learning by diving into these rabbit holes with your customers, right? And knowing, you know, why people, it's not just like if you have product market fit, but it's why you have product market fit. And then you realize, oh shit, we're not sub-segmenting our audience in the right way. And if we look at it in this, if we subdivided by these 4 verticals instead of by these 2 verticals, we're actually like have half fit here and like not as good a fit here, right? So for us today, right, like, and coming back to one of the questions somebody asked earlier, we will dominate for people who have high frequency and low basket size inventory. We're pretty good in the mid. We're still figuring out like how do you make travel work on mobile. But we realize it's not just because our technology doesn't work, it's because like we're not booking as many flights, like actually like end-to-end transaction flights or like, you know, vacations on our phones.
It's too complicated.
Yeah, it's too complicated. It's multi-touch. It's omni-channel. It's like buzzword after buzzword, right? So I think, you know, it's even understanding like that if you're working across many verticals or many use cases, your fit's different in different places. So I think, you know, we've had our first product market fit 2.5 years ago, and then today we're still finding product market fit in kind of new verticals.
Picking audiences is
Super critical. I think that's actually the biggest mistake a lot of first-time founders make. I made this many times. Trying to go too broad too quickly, right? If you try to make everybody happy, that's the total address. If you try to make your entire TAM your first market, like you're screwed from the get-go.
Catherine may be wrapping up soon, but one question for you to let us know is, so this is an ex-Google entrepreneurs community. It's over 600 people on this. We'll send this link out to everyone. Is there anything you're looking for? Would it be helpful if we do it anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely, I mean, just maybe personally, like I'm always looking for feedback and new ideas and just like people who get excited about just like thinking about like frankly the future. But I know it's like sounds silly, but you'd be surprised outside of like the worlds that we all sit in, how few people are. So first and foremost, just as a human and like at a personal level, I'm always excited about that. I think, you know, speaking to URX, you know, we're always hiring, you know, senior data engineering, machine learning, search engineering talent, continuing to build out more on like the customer success side today, which is kind of part of what we realized, especially on the supply side where we need the most help. We'll be looking for some more folks on kind of the marketing side of things, both paid or organic, in the next 6 months. But we're, you know, for us, like to the whole make more than you spend thing, we're you know, we're staying focused on the engineering hiring for the time being. So I think, you know, but again, more broadly than that, I'm always excited to just like people who just like want to actually understand how this stuff works or want to hear more about anything that might have been halfway interesting here. Like I'm always excited to hang out, grab a coffee, talk more detail.
So just for the audience, any last round questions for John?
Are you a Warriors fan now?
Try, you know, it's funny. Mostly, it's hard to not be when you have, you know, Stephen Curry just lighting it up as he is. But
Except against the Lakers.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. I'm trying to indirect approach here. Yeah, basketball. I mean, I've always been a basketball fan, but I was never as big of a basketball fan as I was like baseball and soccer. So like, I was by like indoctrination always a like a Lakers fan, but not as strongly held enough to like have a beef, right? So it's like I like basketball maybe more than anyone. Stephen Curry though, killing it.
Who's your club for soccer?
For soccer, so I actually like more of like international camp stuff, so more like, you know, country kind of things.
Okay.
So like, you know, I like a lot of, you know, my family's from Serbia and Montenegro, so like anytime any team represents them, I'm always going to support it. Always like watching England play.
Yeah. Real Madrid's playing tomorrow.
What time?
Or Champions League. It's,
Okay.
I think it's like 2 o'clock.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Up the ball.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
It's good to chat. Yeah, thanks. Send me